Get him out of this mansion. He's worthless to us. She ordered the guards. But the maid refused to let them take him. He built an empire from nothing, and in the end, he couldn't even keep his own front door. 40 years old, worth more than most people see in 10 lifetimes. And one gray morning, none of it mattered. The woman who promised to spend forever beside him picked up a phone instead of his hand. She said his name the way you say something already in the past tense. He always believed love was the one thing money couldn't touch. But it wasn't the fiancée who stayed when the guards came. It was the maid nobody thought to thank. Hey friend, welcome back. If you're new here, this is the place for true-to-life stories about real people. The kind of stories that stay with you long after the video ends. Before we start, drop the flag of the country you're watching from in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Today's story is a quiet one, and it will break your heart in a way you won't see coming. Let's get into it. The fog came off the Savannah River the way it did every October morning, curling low over the marsh grass and drifting up the long gravel drive of the Calloway estate like it belonged there. It softened the edges of the mansion, 12,000 square feet of white columns and old brick, a house built by a shipping fortune 140 years ago and kept alive since by oil, then software, then whatever Marcus Calloway had turned his hand to next. At 6 in the morning, the kitchen light was already on. It was always on first. Loretta Banks stood at the stove with her sleeves pushed to her elbows, cracking eggs into a blue ceramic bowl she'd bought herself 15 years ago because the house didn't have one she liked. The coffee maker hissed behind her. Outside, a single heron picked its way along the reflecting pool, and somewhere upstairs a shower was running. She knew the sound of every pipe in that house the way other people know a favorite song. She'd come to work for the Calloway family at 22, hired by Marcus's father to help in a kitchen that back then still smelled like his mother's cooking. She'd stayed through the father's funeral, through the mother moving to Charleston, through Marcus growing from a quiet, awkward 25-year-old who ate cereal standing at the counter into a man whose name got mentioned on the business channels. 15 years is a long time to watch somebody grow up in reverse. Getting richer, getting more tired, getting more alone. Marcus came down at 7, tie already knotted, phone already in his hand, the way he'd come down every morning since his father died. "Morning, Loretta," he said, not really looking up, and she set a plate in front of him anyway. 2 eggs, dry wheat toast, black coffee, exactly like always. He ate standing at the island. He always ate standing, like sitting down might mean staying too long in one place. "You didn't sleep," she said. It wasn't a question. "I slept fine." She wiped the counter that didn't need wiping. Fine people don't have 3 cups of coffee before 7. He almost smiled. It was the closest thing to a real conversation he had most mornings, and they both knew it. Marcus Calloway was 40 years old and had more money than he could spend in 4 lifetimes, and if you'd asked anyone who worked with him, they'd have told you he was sharp, generous, a little guarded, a man who tipped well and remembered your kid's name. What they wouldn't have told you because they didn't know was that he still ate his eggs the way his mother used to make them, that he kept his father's reading glasses in the drawer by his bed, that most nights he sat in the study long after the house went dark, not working, just sitting like he was waiting for someone to come find him there. He was afraid of exactly one thing, though he'd never have said it out loud, that everyone who stayed close to him was doing math, that somewhere behind every kind word was a number. It was why he trusted almost no one completely. It was why, when he trusted someone, he trusted them all the way, no half measures, which was, in its own way, its own kind of danger. Loretta was the one exception nobody had to explain. She'd turned down a raise once, back when the company first went public, and Marcus tried to give everyone on staff a bonus that would have changed their lives. "I don't work for the bonus," she told him, and meant it. And he'd never forgotten the way she said it, flat and certain, like it was the easiest thing in the world. At 9, the front gate buzzed, and Marcus's face did something Loretta had learned to watch for over the last 6 months. A kind of loosening, a boyishness that made him look closer to 25 than 40. Vanessa Cole came up the drive in a car too small for the house she was about to walk into. Dark hair pulled back, sunglasses pushed up on her head even though the fog hadn't burned off yet. She was 32, sharp-eyed, quick to laugh, and she had a way of walking into a room like she'd already decided it was hers. They'd met at a charity gala 8 months earlier. Engaged after 4. Loretta had watched the whole thing unfold from the kitchen doorway and the hallway and the edges of dinner parties, the way staff watch everything, invisible and missing nothing. She didn't dislike Vanessa. Not exactly. But she'd learned in 15 years of quiet mornings that the truest thing about a person usually showed up in the small moments. How they talked to the person who refilled their water glass. How they looked at you when they thought you weren't really a person in the room at all. And there was something in the way Vanessa's eyes moved across the house, not at Marcus but past him cataloging, that Loretta had noticed and never said a word about. That morning, as Vanessa came through the front door calling Marcus's name in that bright, easy voice, Loretta noticed something new sitting on the hall table. A thick manila envelope, already opened, Marcus's lawyer's return address printed in the corner. It hadn't been there the night before. She didn't touch it. She just noticed it, the way she noticed everything, and went back to the kitchen to finish the dishes. By noon, the fog had burned off the river completely, and the day looked like any other. But Loretta found herself standing at the sink a little longer than she needed to, looking out at the two of them on the lawn, Vanessa laughing at something, Marcus's hand at the small of her back, and she felt the smallest, quietest unease settle somewhere behind her ribs. She couldn't have told you why. You believe in that kind of love? The new groundskeeper asked her later, nodding toward the window. The kind that happens that fast. Loretta dried a glass and set it in the rack. I believe in the kind that's still there in the morning, she said. Ask me in a year. That evening, after the caterers' vans had pulled out and the last of the party planners had gone home, Marcus found Loretta in the kitchen scrubbing a pan that didn't strictly need scrubbing, the way people do when their hands need something to do while their mind works something out. He leaned in the doorway a while before she noticed him. You've been quiet today, he said. I've been busy today. That's not the same thing, and you know it. He came and sat at the island, the way he used to before the money, before the board meetings, before there was a whole staff to keep the distance between him and a kitchen counter. Talk to me. She hesitated only a second. I just want you happy, Marcus. That's all it's ever been for me in this house. I know that. He said it simply, like it was the one certain thing in a world that had gotten complicated. You're the only person left who wants that and doesn't want anything back for it. She didn't answer that either because there wasn't a safe way to say what she was thinking, that the quiet unease she'd felt on the lawn that morning hadn't gone away, it had only gone underground, waiting the way water waits under a floor before you ever see the stain. Later, alone in her small room off the kitchen, she lay awake listening to the old house settle around her, the pipes ticking, the wind finding the loose shutter on the east side it always found in October, and she thought about the manila envelope on the hall table, and about how quickly a house could start to feel like it was holding its breath. Something in a house like that never stays quiet for long. The engagement party was set for the first Saturday in November, and for 3 weeks the mansion filled with florists and caterers and men carrying folding chairs across the lawn like ants working a hill. Loretta ran the household through all of it. Menus, seating charts, 100 small fires put out before Marcus ever noticed there'd been smoke. It was, in its way, one of the best months she could remember in that house. Marcus laughed more. He came down some mornings already dressed for tennis, boyish, lighter, like something heavy had finally been set down. One evening late, she found him in the study with 2 glasses of bourbon poured. One for himself, one, unexpectedly, set out for her. Sit down a minute, he said, and she did, careful, like the chair might not hold the strangeness of it. You knew my father, he said. You knew what this house was like before it was just me rattling around in it. I did. Do you think he'd have liked her? Loretta chose her words the way she chose everything. Carefully, kindly, true. I think your father liked people who made you laugh, she said. I haven't heard you laugh like this in a long while, Marcus. He nodded, satisfied, and she let that be the whole answer because it was mostly true. But 3 days later, Marcus came down from a routine physical with a look Loretta hadn't seen on him before. Not fear exactly, but the flat, careful blankness of a man absorbing bad news before he's decided how to feel about it. A cardiac irregularity, the kind that needed watching, maybe a minor procedure down the road. Nothing urgent, the doctor said. Manageable. But Vanessa took the news like a woman handed a mission. You need someone who can make decisions if you can't, she told him that night at the dinner table, her hand over his. Not because anything's going to happen. Just so it's handled. So nobody has to guess. Loretta, clearing plates, said nothing. It wasn't her place to have an opinion on a man's medical arrangements, and she told herself that firmly, twice on her way back to the kitchen. Within the week, there was a new lawyer at the house. Not Marcus's longtime attorney, Walter Grimes, who'd handled the family's affairs since before Marcus was born, but a younger man from a firm Loretta had never heard of. Brought in, Vanessa explained smoothly, because Walter was slow with the digital paperwork these days. Marcus signed things. Loretta saw the pages, glimpsed them the way you glimpse things in a house you've run for 15 years. A durable power of attorney, dense with clauses, sitting on the hall table where the manila envelope had once been. You don't like her, Vanessa said to Loretta one afternoon, catching her alone in the pantry. Her voice light but her eyes not light at all. I can tell. I like whoever makes Mr. Calloway happy, Loretta said. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got. Vanessa smiled then, the kind of smile that doesn't reach anywhere near the eyes, and walked away, heels sharp against the hardwood, and Loretta stood in the pantry a moment longer than she needed to, her hands very still on the shelf in front of her. Small things began to shift after that, the way water finds a crack before you ever see it move. The housekeeper who'd worked the West Wing for 6 years was let go, replaced by someone Vanessa hired directly. The study, once Marcus's alone in the evenings, started staying locked. A contractor came through measuring rooms Loretta had never known needed measuring. When she asked Marcus about it, he waved a hand, distracted, already halfway into some call. Vanessa's handling the guest wing renovation. Don't worry about it. She wanted to worry about it. She made herself not say so. The procedure was scheduled for the 3rd week of the month. Minor, the doctors kept saying, routine, nothing to lose sleep over. And Marcus went in on a Tuesday morning looking pale but steady, squeezing Loretta's hand on his way out the door in a gesture that surprised them both. Hold the fort, he told her, trying for a joke, and she held his hand a beat longer than she needed to. He came home 2 days later, groggy on medication, moving slower than she'd ever seen him move. And for 3 days Loretta barely left the East Wing, bringing him broth, checking on him at odd hours, doing the quiet work no one thanks a person for. Vanessa was attentive too in those first days. Visible, photographed almost, sitting at his bedside with a magazine she wasn't reading, holding his hand for the benefit of whoever might be watching. But on the 4th night, Loretta came down the back stairs near midnight for a glass of water and heard voices in the study. The door cracked, light spilling into the hall. Vanessa's voice, low and businesslike, and a man's voice she recognized as the new lawyer's. She caught only fragments. Transfer. Effective immediately. Once he signs off on the trust restructuring, before a floorboard creaked beneath her and the voices stopped. She stood very still in the dark hallway, her heart going harder than the moment seemed to call for, and after a long beat, she turned and went back up the stairs without her water, telling herself it was nothing, telling herself it was none of her business, telling herself the small cold feeling in her chest was just tiredness. She did not believe herself. Not for one single second. The next morning, everything looked ordinary again, which was somehow worse. Vanessa came down in a robe, kissed Marcus on the forehead, asked Loretta if there was any of the good coffee left, and laughed at something on her phone, easy and bright, like a woman with nothing on her mind but breakfast. Loretta watched her across the kitchen and thought about the voice she'd heard through the study door. Low, businesslike, a voice with no laughter in it at all, and wondered, not for the first time, how many versions of a person could live inside one house without anyone noticing the seams. She almost said something to Marcus that day. She got as far as standing in his doorway with his afternoon coffee, the words half-formed, and then she watched him laugh at something on his own phone, lighter than she'd seen him in years, and she lost her nerve. Who was she to hand a happy man a reason to be afraid? On nothing but an overheard fragment and a feeling in her chest. She told herself she'd watch closer instead. She told herself that would be enough. It wasn't the last chance she'd have to speak. It was only the first one she let pass by, and in the weeks that followed, she would think back to that doorway more than once, wishing she'd trusted the cold feeling instead of the easy morning that came after it. And then, on an ordinary Thursday morning, with the fog still sitting low over the river the way it always did, everything Loretta thought she understood about that house came apart in under 4 minutes. Marcus was 3 weeks out from the procedure, stronger but not fully himself, still tiring by afternoon, still needing the cane the doctor had recommended for balance. He'd come down for breakfast the way he always did, and Loretta had set his plate down the way she always did, and for one ordinary moment it looked like any of the 10,000 mornings that had come before it. Then the front door opened without a knock, and 2 men in dark polo shirts stepped into the front hall. Private security, the kind hired by the hour, the kind that doesn't ask questions. Behind them came Vanessa, dressed for the outdoors, not for a house she supposedly lived in. Behind her, the young lawyer, carrying a leather folder. "Marcus," she said, and her voice had changed completely, the warmth gone out of it like a light switched off. "We need to talk about the transition." "The what?" She set a document on the breakfast table in front of him, and Loretta, standing 3 feet away with a coffee pot still in her hand, watched Marcus's face as he read it, watched the confusion, then the disbelief, then something that looked almost like physical pain crossing behind his eyes. The power of attorney he'd signed weeks earlier, the one meant to protect him if anything happened, had already been used. A trust restructuring. Property transfer. The mansion, the accounts, the holding company that owned it all, moved into a new entity. Vanessa's name at the top. Filed and finalized 11 days ago, while he was still recovering upstairs and she was sitting at his bedside holding a magazine she wasn't reading. "This is a mistake," Marcus said, and his voice was quiet in a way Loretta had never heard it. "This has to be a mistake." "It's not a mistake." Vanessa's voice was flat now, businesslike, a stranger's voice wearing a familiar face. "The doctors flagged cognitive risk after the procedure. I had every right to protect this family's assets while you weren't well enough to. I'm well enough right now. You signed the paperwork yourself, Marcus." She didn't even look at him when she said it. She was looking at the security guards. "Get him out of this mansion. He's worthless to us now." 5 words. Loretta would hear them for the rest of her life. The guards moved before Marcus could fully stand, one on each side of him, not rough exactly, but not gentle either, the careful, practiced grip of men who did this for a living and felt nothing about it. His cane clattered to the floor. He reached for it and one of the men kicked it further away, almost absently like it was in the way. "Vanessa." His voice cracked on her name. "Vanessa, look at me." She didn't look at him. The coffee pot slipped from Loretta's hand and shattered on the tile, and nobody in that hallway even turned to look. That was the part that stayed with her longest. Not the cruelty of it, but how small it made everyone. 15 years of a man's whole life, and in the space of 4 minutes he'd become a piece of furniture to be moved out of the way. They walked him through the front door in his slippers, no coat, no cane. His hand pressed flat against his chest like he was checking his own heartbeat was still going. The heavy door closed behind him with a sound Loretta had heard 10,000 times and never once really listened to until now. For a moment, nobody in the front hall moved. Then Vanessa turned and for the first time she looked directly at Loretta. A long, assessing look, the kind you give an object you're deciding whether to keep. "You're staying," Vanessa said. It wasn't a question and it wasn't kind. This house doesn't run itself. Loretta's hands were shaking. She looked down at the broken pieces of the coffee pot on the floor, dark liquid spreading slowly across white tile, and she thought of Marcus at 25 eating cereal standing at that same counter, and of his father's reading glasses still sitting in the drawer upstairs, and of every single morning she'd set 2 eggs and dry toast in front of a man who'd just been thrown out of his own life like garbage. She did not answer Vanessa. She could not make her mouth form words. The lawyer cleared his throat and set the leather folder down on the table Marcus had just been eating breakfast at. Opening it like this was any ordinary transaction, like there wasn't a man's whole life sitting inside it. The estate transfer is complete and legally binding, he said, not quite meeting anyone's eyes. Mr. Calloway will receive a monthly stipend from the trust, effective immediately, pending final review. A stipend. Marcus said the word like he'd never heard it before, like it belonged to some other man's life, not his. He looked around the front hall, the hall his grandfather had walked through, the hall his father had carried him through as a baby, the hall where Loretta had set out 2 eggs and dry toast for 15 straight years, and something in his face went very still, the particular stillness of a man watching the floor disappear beneath him one board at a time. Vanessa was already walking away, phone to her ear, arranging something with a decorator. Her voice bright and unbothered, as if the last 4 minutes had happened in some other house to some other man. That, more than anything, was what broke something loose in Loretta's chest. Not the cruelty of the act itself, but how easily Vanessa moved past it, like closing a door on a room she had no further use for. Loretta stood alone in the front hall for a long moment after the door shut behind Marcus. The broken coffee pot still scattered across the tile, dark liquid pooling slowly toward the edge of the antique rug. Nobody in that house had ever let her clean with anything but the gentlest cloth. She thought about picking up the pieces. She thought about picking up nothing at all and walking straight out the front door after him. She thought about the 15 years, stacked up behind her like a debt somebody else was refusing to pay. She knelt down instead and began gathering the broken porcelain with careful hands, because it was the only thing in that entire hallway she still had the power to do something about, and because some habits, the habit of tending to what's broken, the habit of not walking away, run deeper than fear ever could. What would you do if you were in Loretta's place right now? Tell us honestly in the comments. She hadn't slept. She hadn't cried. She just stood at the kitchen window for a long time after everyone else had gone quiet, watching the place on the front lawn where Marcus's car should have been and wasn't, and then she went and got her coat. Loretta found him 4 blocks away, sitting on a bus bench in his slippers with no coat in the cold October morning, staring at nothing. His hands pressed together between his knees like a man trying to hold himself in one piece. She didn't say anything at first. She just sat down beside him and put her own coat around his shoulders, and for a long moment neither of them spoke at all. "I don't understand," he finally said. "I don't understand how this happened." "I know," she said. "We're going to figure it out. But not sitting on a bench." She took him to her own apartment across town. Small, warm, smelling faintly of the coffee she made every morning out of habit, and put him on her couch with a blanket and made him eat something, because that, at least, was a language she knew how to speak fluently. He slept for 11 hours straight. She sat up most of that time at her kitchen table with a legal pad, writing down every detail she could remember. The lawyer's name, the fragments of conversation she'd overheard through the study door, dates, a timeline, anything that might matter. The next morning, she went back to the mansion. Not for herself. For him. She told herself she was only going to collect a few of his things. His father's reading glasses, the framed photo from his desk, the box of letters she knew he kept in the study closet. Small, human things a man shouldn't have to live without. But when she let herself in through the kitchen door with a key she'd had for 15 years, Vanessa was waiting in the hallway like she'd known Loretta would come back. "I told you this house doesn't run itself," Vanessa said. "And I told you you're staying. That wasn't a request. I came for his things. His things belong to this house now. Everything in it does." Vanessa's voice had a new edge to it, something almost frightened underneath the coldness. the sound of a person moving fast because she knew, somewhere, that speed was the only thing keeping this from falling apart. "You're not going anywhere either, Loretta. Not until the transfer paperwork clears and I know exactly what you saw and what you didn't. You can't keep me here. I can do whatever I want in my own house." The two security guards who'd walked Marcus out the day before appeared in the hallway behind her, and Loretta understood with a cold clarity that this was not a conversation anymore. They took her key. They took her phone. They walked her down to the wine cellar. Cool, windowless, the door heavy oak with an old iron latch that had never once in 15 years been used to lock anyone in. And Loretta Banks, 37 years old, who had given this family 15 years of her life without ever once asking for more than she was owed, sat down on an overturned crate in the dark and, for the first time since the coffee pot shattered on the tile, let herself cry. She did not cry for long. She still had, tucked in her bra where it had been since that morning out of long habit, an old flip phone, the kind she kept for emergencies, the kind nobody thought to look for because nobody thought a woman like her would have anything worth hiding. Her hands shook as she dialed the only number she was certain, absolutely certain, would still be good after all these years. Walter Grimes, the family's original attorney, the man who'd known Marcus since before he could walk, the man Vanessa had so carefully eased out of the picture. He picked up on the second ring. "Walter," she whispered into the dark of the cellar. "It's Loretta. I need you to listen to me. And I need you to believe every word, because I don't have long." She told him everything. The power of attorney, the timeline, the transfer, the study conversation she'd overheard, the guards, the cellar door. Walter Grimes, 71 years old and sharper than men half his age, went quiet on the other end of the line for exactly 3 seconds. "Where's Marcus right now?" "Safe. My apartment." "He doesn't know I'm here." "Good," Walter said, and she heard the sound of a chair scraping back, a man already moving. "Loretta, listen to me carefully. That power of attorney has a competency clause. It only holds if Marcus was deemed incapable at the time of signing. I examined him myself 2 months ago for an unrelated matter. I have him on record, sound of mind, sharp as ever. That document she's using is built on sand. And I am about to bring the whole thing down on her head. Just hold on. Can you hold on?" Loretta looked up at the heavy cellar door, at the thin line of light beneath it, and thought of Marcus at 25, and of eggs cracked into a blue bowl every morning for 15 years, and of a man sitting on a bus bench in his slippers with nowhere left to go. "I can hold on," she said. "Just hurry." She hung up and sat in the dark a while longer, the flip phone warm and small in her hand, and let herself think, for the first time since the cellar door had closed, about how strange it was that the thing saving them both wasn't money or lawyers or the mansion's name in some registry. It was a 15-year-old habit of keeping a spare phone tucked close, a small, unglamorous kind of readiness nobody had ever taught her to value until this exact moment. Upstairs, she could hear footsteps crossing the front hall, Vanessa's voice rising and falling on another call, arranging something, always arranging something, the sound of a woman who believed the ground beneath her was still solid. Loretta closed her eyes and pictured Marcus on her couch, blanket pulled to his chin, sleeping the first real sleep he'd probably had in weeks, and she held on to that picture the way you hold onto a photograph in a storm, carefully with both hands, refusing to let it go. 2 hours passed, then 3. The cellar grew colder, and her back ached from the crate, and more than once she caught herself wondering if Walter Grimes had been too optimistic, if 71-year-old promises made over a shaking phone call in the dark were worth anything at all against a woman who'd already proven she could move mountains of paperwork overnight. But she thought of Marcus's father's reading glasses in that desk drawer, and of 15 years of mornings, and she made herself believe a little longer. Some things can't be undone. But some things don't need to be. Walter Grimes moved faster than Loretta would have believed a 71-year-old man could move. Within 6 hours, he had a judge's assistant on the phone, an emergency competency affidavit filed, and 2 Savannah police officers standing on the mansion's front steps with a court order that made Vanessa Cole's face go the color of the porch columns behind her. When they opened the cellar door, Loretta walked out into the front hall on her own 2 feet, chin up, and the first thing she said to the officer nearest her was not about herself at all. "There's a man who was thrown out of this house yesterday morning who needs to hear this next part standing up," she said. "Somebody go get him." Marcus arrived 40 minutes later, still in Loretta's borrowed coat, moving carefully on a cane Walter had grabbed from the study on his way out, the same cane the guards had kicked away 2 days before. He walked into the front hall of his own home flanked by his attorney and a Savannah police officer, and Vanessa Cole, engagement ring still on her finger, was escorted out through the same front door she'd once walked him out of, on charges that would take the better part of a year to fully unwind in court, but which began, all of it, with one overturned crate in a dark cellar and a woman who refused to stay quiet. The mansion was quiet again by evening. Not the old quiet. Not the lonely, rattling around quiet Marcus had lived inside for years before Vanessa ever came up that gravel drive. A different kind. The kind that comes after a storm has actually passed. Not just paused. Loretta found him in the study that night, sitting in the chair his father used to sit in. His father's reading glasses. The ones she'd gone back for, the real reason she'd walked into that house the second time. Folded closed on the desk in front of him. He looked up when she came in, and for a long moment neither of them said anything at all, because there wasn't really anything that needed saying. "You could have just gone home," he said finally. "After the bench. You could have left it to Walter." "I could have," she agreed, setting a cup of coffee down in front of him. "Black, no sugar, exactly like always. But you'd have done the same for me. I've watched you 15 years, Marcus. I know the kind of man you are when nobody's making you perform for them." He turned the reading glasses over slowly in his hands. "My father used to say the truest thing about a person is who stays when there's nothing left to gain by staying." He looked up at her. "I used to think that was about the person leaving. I don't think that anymore." Loretta didn't have an answer for that, so she didn't try to give him one. She just sat down across from him, the way she had the night of the bourbon, and let the quiet sit between them, comfortable this time, earned. It took the better part of a year. The courts, the fraud charges, the slow unwinding of everything Vanessa Cole had tried to build on a signature she'd never had any right to use. But by the following autumn, the mansion belonged fully to Marcus again, every deed and account restored to his name, and the fog still came off the Savannah River every morning the same as it always had. What changed was smaller than that, and bigger. Marcus moved Loretta out of the staff quarters and into the guest wing she'd once been told was being renovated, gave her a seat on the board of the family foundation he restarted that spring, and told anyone who asked that she wasn't his employee anymore. She was family, and had been for longer than he'd had the sense to say so out loud. The lesson in it was never spoken plainly. Not once, not by either of them. It didn't need to be. It was there in the eggs cracked into a blue bowl every morning, in a coat given to a man on a bus bench, in a flip phone hidden in the dark for exactly the moment it was needed most. Money can buy almost anything in this world. It has never once, not one single time, been able to buy the kind of person who stays. The following spring, on a warm evening with the windows of the study thrown open to let the river air in, Marcus asked Loretta to stay for dinner instead of serving it. A small shift, the kind that would have seemed impossible a year earlier, and which now felt like the most natural thing in the world. They ate at the kitchen island, the way he used to eat standing alone as a young man, except now there were 2 plates instead of 1, and neither of them was in a hurry to leave the table. "I keep thinking about that bench," Marcus said, turning his water glass slowly in his hand. "Sitting there in my slippers, thinking that was it. Thinking I'd built 40 years of a life and it could all disappear in 4 minutes because I trusted the wrong voice." "You didn't trust the wrong voice for 40 years, Loretta said. "You trusted it for 8 months. The other 39 and a bit, you were mostly getting it right." He laughed, a real laugh, the kind she hadn't heard from him in longer than she wanted to admit. And for a moment the whole weight of the last year seemed to lift off the room entirely, leaving behind just 2 people at a kitchen island, and a house that finally, after everything, felt like it belonged to someone who deserved it. "If you've made it this far, I want you to think for a second about the people in your own life who show up in the small, unglamorous moments, the ones who never had to prove anything because they never once made you wonder. Go tell them what they mean to you. Don't wait for the version of this story where it's too late. If Loretta's loyalty moves something in you the way it moved something in me while I was writing this, hit like. It genuinely helps stories like hers reach the people who need to hear them today. Subscribe if you want more true-to-life stories that don't rush to a tidy ending, because that's the only kind of story we tell here. In the comments, I want to know, who is the Loretta in your life, the person who's never once made you wonder if they'd stay? Share this with someone who's been quietly holding a family together without ever once being thanked for it. They'll know exactly why you sent it. Thanks for being here today. I'll see you in the next one.